Can you all see me? No, right? No.
No. I still see her, yes.
Let me call back.
Yeah, no, I don't see you, Monica.
I'm
Okay.
on are you
Let
on
me
your
call
phone?
back.
Yes, I'm on my phone.
Monica, just
Let
put
me
a
call
stick,
back.
just put a stick over your face. That's fine. We're gonna get going.
Mayor, our meeting is live.
Alrighty, thank you very much. Okay, at this point, I'd like to open up the Baldwin Park special virtual meeting. Today is July the 5th, 2020, and the time is 5:05. At this point, I will go ahead and ask everyone to please rise. We're going to pledge allegiance to the flag. Okay. Put your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
Of the United States of America, for which it
to the
stands,
republic for which it stands,
One nation,
nation,
under God.
under God.
Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. At this point, I want to let everyone know that the city clerk is sitting next to me, and at this point, she'll take roll call.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Alejandra Avila,
Here.
Councilmember Garcia,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Paul Hernandez,
Present.
and Mayor Manuel Lozano.
Present. Thank you. Welcome, Monica. All right, thank you so much, City Clerk. At this point, I will ask our City Clerk if we received any communications. So I'm opening up the communication at this time.
No, not for this meeting.
All right, she's indicated to me that she did not receive any public communication letters and or calls. So at this point, I will go ahead and close the public communication. At this point, I will now go ahead and go over to the open session, which has the state audit presentation. Is that Rose Tram or is that Shannon doing it?
Mayor, I'll go ahead and give the presentation. We'll have Rose Tam here and Sam Gutierrez in case there's any questions. Some of the projects included some of the public works projects. So yeah, if we could put the PowerPoint up and we'll go ahead and get started. So on July 16th, the State Controller's Office notified the city that we would be audited. The letter said it was due to the following: increasing operating deficits, deficit fund balances reported in the city's financial statements, expenditures in excess of what was budgeted, and lack of physical inventory of capital assets. That was the introduction letter. It's kind of interesting because the city's general fund reserve had been increasing consistently over the last 5 years from about 5 million to 9 million. So we were not operating in a deficit. And in addition, the physical inventory issue had already been resolved. It had been mentioned by a previous city auditor, and the policy was already in place. I should note here, we do get audited every year by an independent auditor, and from time to time by other agencies regarding gas tax and those type of things. So the 4 items in the initial letter, Finance Director Rose Tam was able to answer those within the first week that we got the letter. However, the audit went ahead and proceeded. Staff cooperated 100% with the auditors, giving them everything they needed, answering all their questions. I should note that many of the recommendations from the report, some had already been implemented before they even came down to do the audit, and many others have already been implemented since the completion of the audit. In fact, there were some new finance policies the City Council adopted in one of the last meetings that helped complete that. So the evaluation was to be of the city's internal control system and was focusing on the years 2016-17 and 2017-18. So it's some time ago. And as most of you know, the council's changed since then. Some of you weren't on the council. There's at least 3. There's at least 3 members who were on at the time who are no longer on the city council. So in March 2020, the city was sent a draft report of the audit, given 10 days to respond. That was right about the time that the stay-at-home order was issued and we closed City Hall. So the state controller's office, they were very gracious in extending our deadline to reply. So I'm going to talk about the findings. You know, when we talk about an audit, there's very specific meanings to the word finding, and usually in a formal audit, we're told whether the finding is for non-conformance or whether it's just an observation or whether it's just merely an opportunity for improvement. We had asked to be informed of this, but their process just basically told everything, you know, basically labels everything as a finding. So we'll just get on to the first finding. According to the state controller's office, was a project where there were expenditures of over $500,000. This was an engineering project that was discontinued. This was for the Civic Center Park across the street from City Hall. So, you know, we concur this project was done. We went through the proper process. We retained a landscape architect who prepared plans and specs for a park in the downtown. We still have those plans. We still have plans for shovel-ready projects should the city ever want to take it up again. At the time, and probably even more so now, the city didn't have funds to construct or maintain the park. I think it, you know, it was hoped that we could come up with grants to do that. In the meantime, new direction was provided by the city council to look at an affordable housing project for that process, for that parcel. As you know, there's a shortage of affordable housing in California, and it's a goal of the state imposing that on cities that we build more affordable housing. So currently we're in an ENA for 150 units of affordable housing on that property. Depending on negotiations, if the city sells the property, we could recoup $1.6 million to the land sale. In addition, the developer would implement and include open space or payment of park funds. I should mention that the funding that was spent for the preparation of plans was park dedication fee. It's the Quimby Fund. Those can only be used for development of parks. Those can't be used to pay for you know, employee benefits or payroll. So we're in the process of doing the ENA for the affordable housing. You know, for some reason it doesn't go through, which sometimes happens with projects. We still have shovel-ready plans should the city decide to build a park in the future. So we believe this was really a governmental body decision. We believe that the council did discuss this item numerous times. It's not really related to internal controls of the city. So at this point, really no further action or follow-up required for that item. I'll keep going through these. Feel free to stop me anytime if you have a question on one of the findings.
Shannon, before you continue, I don't mean to interrupt you, but before you move on from this item, to the last point that you made, I think it's important to provide a little bit more context. And thank you for sharing what you have. The context that I wanted to provide was back in 2008. I was elected to the city council in 2007. As early as 2008, I was driving around with affordable housing developers, showing them the city properties that existed because CRA was being threatened at that time. And it soon went away, and we were trying to look at how to incentivize you know, development, affordable housing specifically, when we didn't have the resources that Community Redevelopment Agency afforded us. And so beginning as early as 2008, you know, we were making the effort to look at some of these sites for opportunity sites for the city, and also to revitalize our downtown area. In 2013, council members Susan Rubio, Cruz Baca, and Ricardo Pacheco decided to entertain the idea of proposing a park at the site, the specific site behind, well, across from City Hall, behind the downtown businesses. We had a thorough conversation. We had many conversations around this topic. And in fact, I expressed concern that we had a main park just across the street at Morgan Park. And, you know, we could use this site for development purposes to revitalize our downtown, to bring in revenues and to create, you know, disposable income for our businesses in the downtown area. So the political will, the three council members led the effort to pursue a park. Then it was realized that the park was going to cost $3 million. It was going to cost, you know, where we were going to get that funding, we'd have to either look at our city funds or look at grant funds. And so at that time, I think Councilmember Ricardo Pacheco decided to change his position and worked with the mayor and I to move forward with the original plan, which was revitalizing our downtown area with affordable housing, with housing. And I know that council members Susan Rubio and Cruz Baca really they took issue with that change of a direction. But we really, in reality, we were going back to what was considered for many years prior to 2013. And we went back to, I'm corrected. The total amount of that park would have cost us $6 million. I was thinking 3 million. Bottom line is we would have had to look for the funding either internally or through grants. And so we didn't have the funds. And there was opportunity to generate revenues. And so that was a political decision. It was the council decision. And I just want to share the context of that because there was no misuse necessarily. It was just in 2013, there was a change of direction from three council members who wanted to build a park. And then those plans did not go through. They fell through. Those council members are no longer on the council. And so, you know, again, this report, this audit was, it looked at the time frame of 2016 to 2018. At that time, there were the mayor, obviously, Manuel Lozano, council members, Susan Rubio, Cruz Baca, Ricardo Pacheco, and myself. So just a little bit more context. I think it is important to share. Those are facts. You can look at the agenda, you can look at the minutes, you can look at the agendas, and you can see for yourself who led the direction of using these funds, $500,000, to look or to consider a park. And we simply just did not have the funding for it. That's all.
Shannon, if I may, really quick.
Sure.
So I remember when you guys were going through this process, and I actually have the minutes. It was October 15th of 2014 when the project was brought up. It was actually item 6. It's to authorize the Civic Plaza. And at that time, we had a unanimous vote to approve that project. It was Baca, Garcia, Lozano, and Rubio. So it was approved on October 15, 2014, unanimously. Then on January 21, 2015, they had to revise, they had to amend the contract or the agreement. And at that time, Lozano, Baca, Rubio, and Pacheco voted yes. Ms. Garcia abstained from voting. And then on February 17, 2016, it's with the new consideration for the exclusive negotiation with MJW came up. And at that time, Garcia, Lozano, and Pacheco were the ones that approved it, with Baca and Rubio saying no. So just to clear the record, everybody was on board at the beginning of the project, and it's in the minutes of October 15, 2014. To January 21, 2015, everybody except Ms. Garcia, which she abstained. And then on the 17th of February, 2016, it was when they approved to consider MJW Investments LLC for the housing project. I just wanted to make sure you had that information. Thank you.
And thank you for that. Thank you for that information, Councilmember Avila. If you look at the minutes prior to, there were multiple conversations around that project. And I even cited, I'd have to go back and look at the minutes like you have, but I even cited where we had parks, where we needed park space. And that was a conversation that was going on for, it was longer than just one council meeting. I'd have to go back and look at that information, but I think what your information highlights is that, yes, I did abstain because I was not in support of, I always had the vision of looking at a revitalized downtown, even beginning as a planning commissioner. And if you looked at the public record of years, back, you would see that that has always been the case. Like I said, I was on the city council. It was council members, Susan Rubio, Cruz Baca, and Ricardo Pacheco, who led the effort to move in the direction of this park. And I certainly voiced my concerns, but at a certain point, if the support is there, you move with the support. Now, did I express my concerns? Absolutely. And I think you've highlighted that, by highlighting my abstention. So, where there's opportunity to work together, I'm all for it, but you can still express your concerns about projects. And I think if you look at the minutes, not just in October, but in months leading up, you will see that, and staff and others will be witness that was a concern. The LA County had just issued, excuse me, LA County had issued at the time a report of the park poor areas of our city. And I repeatedly said that was not one of the areas. There were other areas in the Northeast. There were other areas in the eastern part of our city that were park poor. The site that was proposed was not an area that was designated as park poor. Why? Because we had Morgan Park directly across the street. So if we really look back at the minutes, and if I have to do that homework, then I will. But if we really look back at the minutes, you'll see that there was an ongoing conversation, and it's very clear who led that project. And in fact, I learned that Councilmember Susan Rubio was trying to lobby to get that park named after her, in fact. So that will tell you, who was leading the effort. And so I think it's really important to highlight that this was the council will. And even though early on in my tenure as a council member, we were looking at revitalizing our downtown with, housing and mixed use and retail, that direction changed in around 2013 or thereafter. And so it was just a will of the council. The support was there. And then at one point, Councilmember Ricardo Pacheco, as you pointed out, Councilmember Avila, decided to work with the mayor and I to go back to the original vision. And that's where we stand today. And I do hope that, these projects will generate revenues and housing for our city, because we absolutely need housing. And I think that you would agree about that.
Right, and I'm in agreement. It was outlined on the who voted yes, who voted no, but I just wanted to clarify that at the beginning, everybody voted yes. And then after spending those 500,000, then the project was changed. And so those 500,000, it was done by the direction of the council. However, it could have been used elsewhere had we, well, I wasn't part of it, but had it been discussed further to maybe move a park somewhere else. But being that it was discussed as a council and it was approved, those 500,000, it proves that the money was not mismanaged, whether the project went through or not, because I did try to bring that project back myself in April 13th of 2019. I had Sam bring it back, and it was then that I requested to look into grants to see how we can possibly fund that parking. And since we already had everything in the process and the money had already been spent, at the time the mayor said, let's move this and to look into it. But then you and Councilmember Hernandez stated that you wanted housing there. And I understand right now we're working with Rome to put the affordable housing there. So I just wanted to clarify on the votes. That's all I wanted to do.
Well, first of all, thank you, Alejandra, very much for providing that archive votes. And at the same time, so I do recall at the time that Councilmember Susan Rubio was enthusiastic, like a lot of us were, because she thought we'd get the money. Then eventually we found out that we couldn't get the funds, but nevertheless, we all moved on. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. So at this point, I'll ask Mr. Yahtzee to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So funding number 2, they listed inadequate oversight for on-call service contracts. So this revolves mainly around a contract that the city had with IE, Infrastructure Engineers, also known as AAE. So they didn't quite agree with our contract. However, we had done 2 RFPs for these services within the last 6 years. Our contracts and RFP complied 100% with the municipal code. The municipal code requires that any contract over $24,999 go to the city council. So we did that. The council approved the project. In our opinion, the council put even stricter controls in place so that if any work order out of that contract exceeded $120,000, it would have to come back for city council review. There was also some concern over the increasing payments to the vendor. However, their work is often dictated by the capital improvement budget because they're doing design and oftentimes inspection for that work. And as you know, we've had a very aggressive capital improvement budget over the last few years. So that does increase the use of consultants. Also, we had them covering some vacancies during that time. They also had noted that the consultant was I don't want to say initiating projects, that's probably not the right term, but was submitting proposals on projects. And again, that was under a different director, and that was at a time when our staffing levels were a little bit low. And there's really nothing wrong with that, but we changed that process when we were staffed up and ready to go. So I did mention that Sam Gutierrez and Rose Tam are here if you have any questions. I just also wanted to mention that, this is back a few years ago. Both of them had just pretty recently taken over as directors, and they were really in the process of cleaning up the departments, getting policies put into place, changing past practices that needed to be done. So they have been working on that constantly and are continuing to do that. One item that was in the first contract with AAE was quarterly reports to the city council. Those had not been done consistently in the past. It's not required in the current contract. We think it's not a bad idea, and Public Works will start sending those quarterly reports out to the city council in the future. Next slide.
Shannon?
Yes.
On that topic, can you just let us know the process of how we selected the on-call contractor?
So the last contract, we did an RFP. We solicited from anybody and all contractors who would bid on that services. They outlined their services and their fees. We actually ended up going with AAE, who had been the previous contractor. They did provide us the lowest fees, and we also had implemented that project sort of a baseline percentage. So, for example, a traffic signal would be the cost was preset, so that if there's a traffic signal design, the fee for that would be a certain percentage of the project. So all of those fees are locked in. There's really nothing else to negotiate. But again, that process, staff went through that process. They reviewed all the RFPs. They made that city council, and the city council approved the contract, which is exactly what the municipal code requires.
I have a question.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead,
Okay,
Ms.
thank you. I'll wrap it up here. So just to reiterate then what you just said, the council did put out an RFP or an RFQ for the on-call contractor, and the council from that process then chose AAE for their competitive rates. So that's what I'm hearing you say,
Correct.
and that is in compliance with our city municipal code.
Correct.
And is that what most cities do?
Yes. However, I should mention most cities don't have the other the stricter control in place, the $120,000. Oftentimes, cities will let the on-call services, up to the total contract amount. It could be 800,000, 1.2 million, and then it never goes back to city council. So I think we actually have stricter controls. There's some other cities, larger cities will have maybe multiple on-call contractors on board. We're a smaller city, and in some ways it's good to have a single consultant because you're working with them every day on projects. But there's various ways to do it, but what we're doing is not unusual, and I like I said, I believe it has stricter controls in place than some cities.
And those rates are locked in, you said, right? And that was through the RFQ process.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So Shannon, a quick question. What was the amount before the 120? Did you hear me?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question.
So you said that the projects don't have to come to council unless they go over 120. Is that what you said?
Well,
Was there a smaller amount before?
So the initial contract went to council for approval, and then any other task that exceeds 120,000 has to come back to council a second time.
My question is, has it always been 120, or was it a smaller amount before?
So Sam, I'm not sure if you can help me. I believe both of the contracts had 120,000 in it, but it may have been changed at one time. I don't know, Sam, if you have that number. If you're
hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah, hi. So yeah, I don't know previously what that number was, but you are correct, Shannon. The 120 limit was implemented as an addendum to the previous contract before we RFP'd for the second contract, the current contract. And in this current contract, we thought that the 120 limit was a good idea, a good amendment, so we carried it over to the new contract.
So Sam, yeah, I think what you touched on is the original contract. I think 120 was added in the original contract, so it sounds like at one time there was no
Correct.
amount in place to bring back items. So I think previously, any project could have been under the original contract regardless.
So with no limit.
Right, they were unlimited before, and then there was an amendment made to that existing contract, the prior contract, to cap them at 120,000, and they go to council for a second time. We thought that was a good idea, so we carried that over into the new contract.
And why is it a good idea, Sam? Just to help understand that.
Yeah, so it just adds another layer of redundancy to the.
Can't hear.
Sorry, pardon me. I just got a phone call. I'm using my iPad. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. I'm using my iPad, so phone calls are answered on my iPad. So I do apologize for that. I'm so sorry. Yeah. So if a particular project, a high dollar, high limit project, usually carries the design costs, for example, a $2 or $3 million project, design services could be somewhere around 250,000. And we felt that bringing back for council approval a second time, design services over 120 would be just the second layer of sort of like oversight and just kind of letting council know what we're doing.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I'll move on to number.
That's fine. Let's go on.
Shannon, actually, you know what? I was just thinking, you mentioned the reports earlier and the quarterly reports. And I'm just to repeat, we went through an RFP process. We selected an on-call contractor. Those rates were locked in. And then for added measure, we implemented this $120,000 cap, so that should anything exceed $120,000, it would come back to us. What I would suggest is perhaps yet another measure to say at, I don't know what number, we can all discuss it here, maybe 500,000, 750,000, just to include that in the report so that we can track how much is being, it's just like the watchdog of like how much is being expended. So it's just an added measure, and perhaps it would address any concerns that the state controller's office had.
Yeah, I think we can do that as part of the quarterly reports. That's definitely not a problem.
I personally, 120 is a bit much before it comes to city council, but that's something I would like to discuss with council members at a later time.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay, so, if there's nothing else, we'll move to 3. So number 3, the review was failure to use a competitive procurement process for some service contracts. Recommendation was to comply with the municipal code pertaining to competitive procurement. And then number 2, adopt a strict policy pertaining to sole source vendors to ensure the requirements to use a competitive procurement process are not circumvented. So our city code is a little unique, and it's actually kind of somewhat vague and outdated in regards to professional services. We definitely agree that a competitive process is good, and we should be doing that almost all the time. Most cities, our city code actually says that it shall be awarded to the lowest responsible bidder, which is actually very unusual in city services. And we're only talking about professional services. We're not talking about buying a vehicle or doing a construction project. These are professional services, consulting services, attorney services, engineering service, economic development services. And the reason that most cities, although they look at the fee, it's not based merely on the lowest fee. And the reason for that is because professional services, you're often looking for particular qualities, experience of the vendor. Maybe they are very experienced in this type of work. So those factors can also outweigh the fees. The fees are good to look at to make sure that we're competitive, but I think you have to weigh all of those things. So the next slide, they did touch on legal services, and the wording of the code again is very vague, and it says, when directed by city council, staff should do an RFP. But there's a lot of times, one, that city council doesn't direct us to obtain services, and there's also times when, for example, in legal services, if we're issued if the city's sued, we oftentimes have only 30 days to respond. So that's why we have firms already on contract. The city councils approved their contracts, approved their fees, and they're ready to handle these cases as needed. So as far as the sole source, we've already put into place a strict policy pertaining to sole source. And what had happened, there was a few instances where a department had bought something and said, oh, it's a sole source. So that basically means no one else has it. So we just need to really question that and really make sure that that's the case. And it oftentimes is in software, because if you're buying a software module, you can only possibly, for example, buy a Microsoft software module. It has to be compatible with your system. If you're building a police radio system out of Motorola radios, then you're going to have to buy the Motorola component. So we,
Let me ask a question. But when you say we accept the lowest bid, and always been it, is it because we're a charter city, or what's the two terms between the charter city and what's the other term that's referred to how the municipality governs themselves?
yeah. So we're
General law city.
We're general law versus what's the other? Is it charter? Is that the one?
That's a charter city. We are not a charter city.
Okay, so a charter city like Irwindale doesn't have to accept the lowest. It could accept anyone. Am I correct? Because they're a charter city, like Pasadena.
The charter
Well-
cities go by their charter, and it depends on how they set up their charter, Mayor.
Oh, got it. Okay, just curious.
Yes, and that's true, and that's mostly true when you talk about construction projects, because the state has very strict for public works construction projects. You must take the lowest bid as long as they've met all the requirements. So the charter cities have some leeway in that. But again, when we're talking about professional services, almost every city has the leeway to not always take the absolute lowest fee, because you need to look at quality and experience. So basically what we're going to recommend is the follow-up, and myself and finance department, what we'll do is research some of the other city municipal codes, some of the newer, more progressive codes, and we'll look at those, and we'll come back with a proposed code amendment that is a little clearer, and it will be easier for staff to follow, and has some more flexibility to it.
Shannon, this code, do you know?
I'm sorry.
The code that we have right now? I mean,
That section, I don't know off the top of my head. I can look at, if I look at the code, it usually has the date when it was adopted, and I can get that for you shortly.
yeah, definitely needs revised.
Shannon, for the
Yes.
public information, what do general law cities like ours typically do when it comes to professional services?
So most cities are very flexible according to competitive services, and are not bound to the lowest fee. In fact, many of them have provisions for professional services under a certain amount, that they either have a very informal process, or even for some small amounts waive the RFP process. But for the most part, the general city purchasing codes that I'm familiar with are very lenient as far as professional services, and allow you to view all of the qualities of the consultant, their past experience, how they interviewed, and their proposal, and allows you to weigh all of that with the fee, and doesn't bind you to taking the lowest responsible bid.
Like maybe a specialty area, because for example, like city attorney services, not every attorney is going to specialize in the issue that might come up. So it sounds like with what we have in place, we're able to choose an attorney based on their specialty area and how it matches the issue that we're facing.
Correct.
Okay, so, and it sounds like you're gonna be surveying some of the cities and then bringing to us, what is the common practice? It sounds like we are doing the common practice, and then implementing it into the code, just to update that.
That's correct.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead, Vice Mayor. Go ahead.
Thank you. No, as others have already stated, I fully support, having the flexibility when it does come for professional services. Being in government and seeing the type of bids that have come in, being bound by the lowest bid doesn't necessarily provide the best services or goods for our city. Specifically, as Councilmember Garcia mentioned, for if it's such as law services, we do have to make sure that we have the right attorney or the right agency that will provide the best service for and on behalf of the city. So certainly looking forward to seeing the updated ordinance in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you. Go ahead, moving along.
Thank you. So number 4, they listed possible inflation of city's official pension. The SCO quoted a state law that refers to employees. So this refers to past police chief Michael Taylor, who left the city and retired. And then he came back as a retired annuitant to work as an interim. And then at another point, he actually came out of retirement to become a city employee again, and negotiated a brand new contract at that time. So we didn't think, and we still don't think that that law applies. And even at the time, our HR department and Taylor himself, we all called PERS, explained exactly what was happening. PERS agreed that we were on the right track. We followed all of their advice and guidance. So we believe we did everything correct. But we said we'll run this by PERS again and just make sure that they have still back up their original response.
And Shannon, is that a report that you're sending back to them? PERS had to say about it?
So we'll probably just send them the excerpt from the report because it quotes the state law, and we'll just let them know we're sending this to them. The state law has been brought to our attention. They believe it applies. So,
Okay.
so the state law basically says if you have a group of employees, it's actually a little bit confusing because it says if you have a group of employees, or if you have an employee who's not in a bargaining unit, and they're going to get a raise, then you have to look at all of the other employees in their bargaining unit, which is strange because it just said they're not in a bargaining unit, and you cannot give them basically a huge raise that the other people in that group didn't right before they retired, because that would be spiking their salary. In our case, Taylor wasn't an employee he was not an employee of the city. He was a retired person, and he came back and he created a brand contract.
Which was a huge contract and I disagreed with, but that's the past.
Okay, and we'll send that.
Can I, Mr. Mayor, can I add something in there?
Yes, go ahead, legal counsel.
I think it's also important to remember when the council was going to give that contract to former Chief Taylor, you knew that was only going to be a year, that you were only going to pay that for a year, and then you were going to go back down to different kinds of pay scales. And the reason why the council did that at the time was because we were in a very unique situation. And so they agreed to make that contract for a year. And in fact, that's what the council did do. After Chief Taylor, the salary went way back down again. So that was just a one-time thing that the council did for some very unique circumstances, and knew that they would not be paying that amount, from that point forward.
Okay, at this point, thank you very much for that. We'll go ahead and move forward.
Okay, so if we could go to number 5. And I've got to make a comment here because I've seen in some of the blogs and some of the online stuff that, people are saying about number 1 and number 5, there's $500,000 missing. Who stole the $500,000? Who stole the $3.4 million? I have to stop here and say there was absolutely, under this report and this review, there was no wrongdoing, there was no fraud, there was no corruption, there was no money missing, there was no wrongdoing. A couple of these were accounting errors, and this next one is an example, is basically an accounting error. Normally, projects are approved either in the beginning of the year or in the capital budget, as you know. However, there's projects that have different timelines, and we had a $3.4 million energy savings contract, which was on a different timeline, and it was because it was dependent on a loan from the state of California. Well, the state of California gave us the loan for the project was done. What should have happened is there should have been an amendment to the budget, and it's basically an accounting item saying this money is now added into that year's budget. That wasn't done at the time. It was caught at a later date, and that procedure has already been revised so that when projects are approved mid-year or mid-cycle, that they get appropriated to the budget so that they show up as a budget line item. So it was basically an accounting item. Again, no wrongdoing, no money missing. It was just an accounting item, and there's no further follow-up on that because the procedure is already put in place. Number six. Number six was just in general, some policies and procedures were outdated in the personnel and accounting manuals. Most of those have already been updated or in the process of being updated. And this is a continual, this happens continually. I think, in the last 6 years I've been here, we've updated accounting policies. At least this is the third time. So we're constantly doing that. And obviously it's good practice, and it's something we will continue to do, is to update policies and procedures and give that information out to the employees to make sure they're following it.
Shannon?
Sure.
Yes.
Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I believe, part of the item that they found was, they were speaking to the, the accounting and personnel manuals not being fully updated, historically back to 1984. The process in which staff is going to revise is, are we doing a full review of both documents?
I can probably let Rose Tam answer this. Right now we've updated the very important policies. It takes a lot of time and energy to look at the entire manual and update it. It's something that's normally done piece by piece. Rose, if you have any other comments.
Hi, Shannon. I
Yes.
agree with what you say. The whole entire accounting manual is a full book, and at that time, compared to the new high technology, it's kind of outdating, and that's why finance has been continually updating a certain portion of the accounting manual on an as-needed basis. For example, we updated the accounts receivable, accounts payable, payroll, policy procedure, and the purchasing order, or the credit card, because back then in the 80s, hardly anybody used credit card, especially the city employees. And therefore, we update the credit card and travel policy and procedure. And as we mentioned, we have continually update the policy and procedure on an as-needed basis or based on the auditor's recommendation.
Yes, I understand that. But could we also please just, take the time to, review the entire, manuals, both of them, and see, what items are, again, outdated, that should be removed or replaced with new practices and policies. And more importantly, if you can bring those to City Council, when these have been updated, so as a whole, we can adopt them, and then you'll have a new date of approval. And again, these manuals and policies are always, they're a living document.
Yes.
They need to be moved forward or removed depending on the circumstances. But at least at that point, the council would have adopted them. And getting rid of, any old and outdated procedures that, don't necessarily align with our current practices. So if we could, certainly look at that practice instead of just updating them from time to time, then that way we'll have much thorough and more comprehensive review of the documents. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, we can do that. Okay, if there's no other questions, number 7. So number 7, it was in regards to check handling. In the past, employees were allowed to pick up the checks when a vendor was coming in to get paid, or maybe there was a contractor working in the field and they were allowed to pick those up and hand deliver them. That's no longer the best practice, and that practice has already been discontinued and a new policy and procedure put into place. Number 8, lack of itemized receipts for some city issued credit card purchases. So there were a very few cases where a detailed receipt were not attached that contains the breakdown of the service. Sometimes when you make a purchase online, you're able to print out something that doesn't, it might tell you in general what was purchased, but doesn't give you quantities and that type of thing. Or sometimes if you do a purchase with a credit card, you get 2 receipts, and one is a credit card printout, but the other is a printout that says itemized list. So there were some places where the wrong receipt was attached and it slipped through. Again, nothing improper was purchased, nothing improper done. It's just a paper trail. I know most of you know that when you use a credit card to go to a conference, that Rosa is very detailed in making sure that she has a breakdown of all of those. So a good example is, a hotel room. It might tell you the room rate, the taxes, other fees that are on there. So those are what we're asking for. That policy's already been updated. Procedures have been put into place, and we're making sure that those itemized receipts are contained.
Shannon, I
Yeah.
just want to mention, I chuckle when you mentioned Rosa, because yes, I've been, on city business, and I remember a $3 receipt to a parking structure, and it was a courthouse because of a case that I was involved with, unfortunately, in my relation to the city. And Rosa was just on me about the $3 parking, receipt, and I had to go through all of my receipts or go looking for it. So that's why I do have a hard time believing that everybody else wasn't given the same response or practice or policy. So let's just make sure that everybody's on board with that. I know Rosa is on top of it, and if she's holding us to it for a $3 receipt, then we need everybody to follow that lead and make sure that everything is accounted for and that nothing is falling through the cracks.
Correct. Rosa's very, very good at that. She handles that for administration. The handful of these that came out from other departments, for example, one was purchase of police department supplies. Well, it wasn't broken down to say, X number of uniform shirts, X number of handcuffs, whatever. So, but again, that's fixed. Policy procedures been put into place. We're watching those very.
So Shannon, about how many of those receipts did they find that they were not itemized, that it caught their attention? I mean, if it was 1 or 2, I can see probably them not noticing, but how many were caught without being itemized?
Let me see. I'd have to go back to the report, but I have it here. I can look that up real quick. They went through quite a few receipts, so I'm not saying it only 1 or 2, but percentage-wise, it was very small percentage-wise.
So I never use city credit cards. I don't even have one. But so when you issue these credit cards to people, are they not aware that they need to bring itemized receipts? Are they not told that if you don't have an itemized receipt, you won't be reimbursed? Or I don't know how that works. Is it a city they're using or their own and they're getting reimbursed?
No, this would be a city credit card. And they are told and they know, but it was just sometimes the review was a little and what looked like a receipt with a detailed purchase was really just a receipt that had some information, and that was attached.
Again, it was obviously something noticeable, so we need to be very careful with receipts to make sure they're item. If not, make the person accountable for paying for those receipts, since they weren't responsible to bring the itemized receipts, which they know they should be bringing. That's my thought.
Yes, and the policies and procedures that were just updated that the council approved a couple meetings ago, that include sort of a tightening up of this policy, clearly stating and requiring the itemized receipts. I can get you that number later. It might take me some time to find it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving
Okay, so next item. Number 9, this was a period that they found that there were some bank reconciliations that were done late. There was 5 instances that were pointed out. There's really no follow-up. The city already had implemented new procedures and policies to make sure this doesn't happen. Not to make excuses, but this was during a time when there was a little bit of, I think there was a vacancy in finance, and we were implementing a new finance system. So staff were a little overwhelmed with that. Things got delayed a little bit. Those were late, but again, that's cleared up, and that's no longer happening. Number 10, they say lack of annual employee performance evaluations. I guess they pulled out a number of evaluations, and that said that 2 out of the 10 were late or not yet completed. Employee evaluations are always an ongoing issue that we need to keep up on, and we agree those need to be done timely. It's difficult for managers, they may have 10 evaluations to do, and when they do, they get 2 or 3 done, another 2 or 3 are due. So sometimes they're constantly doing them, and we agree we need to keep up. We're having HR is going to be sending out quarterly reports to their directors, indicating to them which evaluations are outstanding. Honestly, this indicates we're batting 80%. I mentioned this to a few other city managers. They kind of laughed and they said we're probably doing pretty good compared to most cities at 80%. But we're going to strive for 100% and have those done and up to date at all times. So 11, lack of controls over purchasing approvals. So when a department makes a purchase, they have to do a requisition. It has to go for supervisors' approvals, has to go to finance, make sure that the money was budgeted. So they found 39 that had either didn't have the proper approval or didn't have it on time, and the approval had gotten done after the fact. We had already put into place enhanced forms that need to be filled out on the requisitions to make sure that the proper signatures are obtained, and a procedure so that these things get processed before items get purchased. And honestly, some of these things, staff are really busy. Staff have deadlines. They're trying to put on a program. They're buying supplies for a program, and the paperwork's taking a little bit longer, but the event happens tomorrow, and they, a couple of these instances where they had to take delivery of the items. Again, nothing improper was purchased. Nothing was done. Nothing was done that was illegal. Nothing was missing. It's just that we didn't follow the proper procedures in a few cases. And again, there's no further follow-up because that policy and procedures already been put into place. That's
are in place. Johnny, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
So you said there's no further action because all these are now in place? The 39 findings that they found, you've already showed them that we have a new procedure in place?
Well, so what they basically did is they went back in the time frame and went through all of the number of purchases, and they found some that hadn't quite followed the proper procedure. For example, an item might have been purchased, but it wasn't signed a few days later because the paperwork was sitting on the supervisor's desk to review and sign. So in response, we revised the forms and made them very clear what signatures are approved or are required for approval. Put that policy into place. They we mentioned what we're going to do. They didn't really. They don't come back and review our policies and procedures. They just recommend something in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't understand how the purchases were made. I'm in charge of making sure all our purchases are approved before they even go to fiscal, and then fiscal approves from there. So I'm not sure how we can skip so many items without approval and event. So yes, I would like more clarification on what the policies are, please. If you can send email to me.
Yeah, we can do that. And then past, I believe those policies and procedures are now in place so that things, items are following the right proper protocol.
Okay.
Shannon, I have a question. Councilmember Avila mentioned the 39 findings. Can you speak to the 39 findings?
I'd have to pull out the report. It gives some. I can get you the examples of those. Yeah. For example, one that I remember was, I think a department was buying shirts for an event, community event. It might have been the 5K run or something like that. And, the event had to be done and the paperwork didn't get signed until after the fact.
Can you give me a high level of what the 39 findings are that you're referring to?
Well, yeah, that's one example where the
okay. Well, I understood that there were 11 main findings, right? 11 major findings within the audit. Is that correct?
Yes, and this is number 11. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so the 39, what is Councilmember Avila referring to exactly when she says 39 findings? What were those? I'm trying to understand what that is.
Oh, yeah, that I think she's referring to that finding 11. It claimed there were 39 purchases. 39 purchases were made without the procedure. Yeah, that would be.
Okay, that's what I wanted to understand, because I understood that the state controller's audit found they had 11 findings. And what you're saying is that in item number 11, there were 39 purchases that they're calling into question.
Correct.
Okay. And you're saying that those purchases were, what, describe them to me, what characterized them for me?
So for example, one was, for example, that I gave some t-shirts that were needed for an event. The event was the next day, they had to be purchased, but the paperwork didn't get signed until, maybe the next Monday.
Okay.
That's one example. And that's sort of in general what they are. I can get you the full list.
Okay. And so what are we doing to address the state controller's concerns, I guess, around those items, those purchases?
Well, so their concern is we put a policy in place for future purchases. And that's what we've done. We put a policy for all future purchases. It's already in place. Has the proper paperwork that has enhanced description, enhanced instructions, and then has some checks and balances when it goes through each department and the finance department. So that's what's been put into place.
And what was the cumulative total, the sum total of the 39 purchases?
I can get that for you. I have it right here handy. I'm sorry, but I can get that.
I'm just saying, for the public that's tuning in, it's just good for them to understand and for, us to understand too.
Yeah, most of them were smaller purchases, $5,000 or $10,000. I think there was one that was a little higher, but Again, I don't want to guess without actually having to go back and look at the list.
Yeah, I don't want you to guess either. I don't mean to put you on the spot or anything. Because yeah, I would not want the wrong information to be communicated. So if it's available, great. And if not, we can follow up at a later time.
Yeah, we'll send that.
Shannon, can you put that information on the website on how much the total was for those 39 purchases? Because it doesn't specify, I don't believe.
Sure, do that.
Shannon, one other item, deadlines are going to come, in the future, these sensitive, time purchases, happen, quite often in a normal business, especially when we're running, special events and so forth, as you mentioned. Can you make sure that the control policy also has some information in regards to how to interact during emergencies? I don't want us to necessarily be binded, by our policy because, we have an emergency. And I just want to make sure that that policy, that type of language is in there. And more importantly, if we could also put in language where, the finance department does spot checks, throughout the years, that will just make sure that, the key oversights and the checks and balances are being, are occurring throughout the year.
You can also have open POs with certain companies. So when you have an emergency, you already have that available. And of course, you have to provide an itemized list of what you purchased, but it can be done on an emergency basis. And it's been pre-approved for a certain amount. I mean, don't make it a big amount, but just make sure that money is available for emergency purchases.
So, Councilmember, are you speaking more towards like a pre-qualified list of items?
So you can have an open go with the company. Let's say we have to build something at the Parks and Rec for an event, for a performance for the kids, and something broke and we don't have time to get this money approved. So you have a purchase order at Home Depot for, let's say, a $200 purchase order open. So you can just go with that PO to Home Depot, purchase items, bring back your receipt, and then Home Depot gets paid once we get the receipt. Our fiscal department will pay Home Depot the amount to have an itemized receipt.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the end of the report tonight. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, Shannon, thank you very much for taking the time and sharing all this in detail and everyone's background on this. The one thing I'll ask, if my colleagues agree, is if you can create just a matrix in regards to items that are open, items that have been completed, any items that have a delay. This type of matrix, just basically make sure that all the items that the audit has identified as a council, we have reviewed and adopted at our level, and that matrix can be just included in our consent calendar, and as needed we can pull it out if that's okay with my colleagues.
Certainly, we can do that.
Alrighty, let me also just say the hospital that I work at, and this happens to every organization, we go through refer to Joint Commission auditing, similar to what it is here. So we should be ready at all times. And I know that we do have an auditor that comes, is it once a year? Am I correct on that? Once a
Yes,
year?
correct.
We should also do one on our own to make sure that all the processes are in place and check them, see they're balancing out, see they're all working hand in hand. That's no different than a school that gets accredited by the WASP or organization. I don't know on what type of basis, but it's for us to make sure that we are up to par and everything. What I do like is that they also did conclude that there was no improprieties. So there was nothing that would stand out that would say, well, the city of Baldwin Park has violated, or there's money missing as it's circulating through social media. But of course, everyone's entitled to their own personal theory and opinion, and there's nothing we could do about that. So I want to, first of all, congratulate all the staff that participated in the audit. But at the same time, I would request, Shannon, that we have our own internal, set up sometime within the year where we run our own audited internally besides the actual finance, just so that we're up to par with what the state has mandated. And of course, you know, having the state audit us, it's that occurs. Now, if you want to see a scaling, literally scaling audited, go online and look up the one for the city of Linwood. Incredible. That happened about 2 years ago, I believe. So when I look at that and look at Baldwin Park and look at other cities, I mean, we don't want to be in that area. And I know that we're doing good. And these audits are also designed to assist you so that you improve from your current processes. So it's important for us to note that as well. All righty. Thank you. Anyone else have any other questions? Okay, if not, at this point, we will go into closed session. So I guess we'll be logging out, logging back in. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Mayor.